This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 8:02 on LBC. Welcome to Tuesday's edition of Cross Question. With me on the panel are the former Conservative Sports Minister and MP current MP for Chatham and Aylesford, Tracey Crouch, unless she wants to tell me something. Nigel Nelson, political editor of the Sunday Mirror and Sunday People. We used to do so many paper reviews, didn't we?
We did indeed.
Back in the day. Claire Hanna is SDLP MP for Belfast South. And Julia Hobsbawm, the writer and broadcaster and author of this new book, The Nowhere Office, Reinventing Work and the Workplace of the Future. The lines are open for your questions, 0345 6060 973, and you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to our first caller. It's Jonathan in Finchley. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, good evening, everybody. My question
Hi.
is this. 90% of animals that end up on our plates are farmed in factory farms, which involves extreme cruelty to those animals. Why is everyone in such a fuss about someone who kicked a cat?
Well, for those of you who don't know what Jonathan is referring to, the West Ham defender Kurt Zouma, who cost West Ham £25 million in the summer, he was filmed by his brother, no less, kicking his cat, literally volleying it, and then slapping it. Naturally, it's caused outrage. West Ham fans, I think all football fans, are outraged by it. And he started for West Ham tonight in their game against Watford. So, Nigel Nelson, let's come to you first. Why, first of all, I mean, it's an interesting question from Jonathan. Why are we so outraged about a footballer kicking a cat when we don't get so outraged about factory farming? And what do you think, I'm going to add my own question here, what should West Ham have done about it? Because clearly he's playing tonight.
Well, the first thing is you get angry about it because cats are pets. I think if he was caught kicking any animal, it would be completely unacceptable. And what should happen is he shouldn't be playing tonight. I think he should be fired and, having seen the video, probably prosecuted for what he did there.
Apparently the police have said they're not going to prosecute, which you think, well, they've got a video, it's a cut and dried case, why wouldn't they do that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it just seems to me that he was guilty of abject cruelty to that animal, and the answer is the police should have come in. I'd be interested to see what the RSPCA do now, because it may well be they can get their own prosecution sorted out. But certainly with something like that, the idea that West Ham let him on the field this evening is just madness. And of course that'll just upset so many of their fans anyway.
And of course all the social media memes have already started, sort of instead of I'm forever blowing bubbles, it's I'm forever kicking tittles. So I imagine the Watford fans will be coming up with a few choice chants tonight.
I'm sure they will, yeah.
Julia, I don't know if you're a football fan, but it doesn't really matter on a question like this, does it?
It doesn't, and although, how did you know that? I'm not a football fan.
It was an educated guess.
I once gave a member of my family who supports Tottenham and Arsenal baby grow in really good faith,
dear.
so I'm really bad on football. But I don't think anybody has to think anything about football to be against kicking cats. I suppose in answer to your question, Jonathan, it's about visibility, that we forget what goes on when we don't see it. We see packaged meat, those of us that eat meat, and we think, oh, how sanitised. When you see someone being cruel to a pet, as Nigel has said, we think differently. So, of course, the hypocrisy's mad. The only note of caution I would have is that in a 10-day period in which there's been allegations of rape in football by footballers, the whole saga at Wraith Rovers, a football club I had followed the story about, I suppose in a way we've got to figure out, are we talking about bad behaviour in football and cruelty coming from footballers, and what's that about? Or are we talking about one scandal after another? Because I don't think you can take every footballer off the pitch. I mean, the truth is, what's the policy here? But in answer to the question about is it hypocritical, I think that's what you really mean. Yes, it absolutely is.
Let's go to Tottenham fan Tracey Crouch.
Well, actually, there's a couple of really good points, just picking up from both Nigel and Julia there. I mean, the first thing to say is that we are a nation of animal lovers and people do care about their pets. But actually, while there is an element of hypocrisy, we do actually have a really high standard of animal welfare in our farming production. Hence why we've had all these debates in the past about, are we going to lower the quality of the farming production methods and animal welfare standards through various trade deals and agriculture deals and so on. So, it's not, perfect, that's for sure. And certainly I, as a huge animal welfare campaigner in Parliament, advocate for better standards, but they're not absolutely dire and atrocious. That said, I think that, what we've seen from this particular case is just, complete cruelty. And footballers are influential characters. They do have, I think, a responsibility and duty to behave properly. It's not every footballer. They're not all going around kicking cats or various pets. But in this instance, like Nigel, I hope that the RSPCA look very closely at prosecution. And I think the headline you might have seen earlier was that the Met Police aren't going to investigate, but I believe this is under the jurisdiction of Essex Police, who are working very closely with the RSPCA on investigating this.
If you were sports minister and you saw this story, would you ring up David Sullivan, the chairman of West Ham, and say, I hope you're going to do something about this, David?
I'm shocked he's been picked tonight, because actually West Ham...
I am too, as a West Ham fan.
I am shocked, because in the statement, West Ham were very quick to get out a statement to say that they were horrified with this and that he would be disciplined. Well, he was then picked for the team. That, to me, is not being disciplined. It's almost as if they've actually just cast this aside and are carrying on as normal. So I'd be interested to hear exactly what is happening. And his brother, by the way, who filmed that incident, is also under an investigation for throwing a shoe, I think, at one of the cats. And so, clearly they just thought it was something that was really hilarious to do.
Nigel said he thinks that West Ham should sack him. Now, that's a sort of heart reaction, I think. If you use a head reaction, you think this guy cost West Ham £30 million. Can any business afford to throw away £30 million?
Well, if he gets a sentence, particularly if it's a custodial sentence, then I don't think that they have any choice. You wouldn't get a custodial sentence. You can get 6 months. 6 months for animal cruelty. So at least. And
it's going up to 5 years as well. Under new laws.
Under the animal sentience stuff and the kept animals bill, I think we're raising the sentencing for cruelty to animals.
See, Robbie, my producer, just said in my ear, do you support sacking him? A question for me, which, as I'm the chair of the panel, I feel I can sort of resign myself from this, but I actually don't support sacking him. Because I just don't think when you're £75 million in debt, you've lost the 30 million if you sack him, and then you've got to spend another 30 million. Claire, Hanna.
Yeah, I mean, I watched that video and I wished I hadn't. I think it was disturbing, and I think particularly so because there was a small kid in the room, and I suppose it's the mindset that thinks there's amusement in that level of just needless violence towards anything defenceless. There must be consequences in terms of RSPCA and a prosecution if it meets the threshold. And as you've said, the evidence is there, and I think people will wonder, what do the Met investigate and prosecute when evidence is put in front of us? In terms of the extent to which he keeps his job, I suppose people would in other more run of the mill jobs, but people will make judgments about that person, and I would imagine it would affect his future earnings in terms of endorsements and some of the other, privileges that come with being a sports professional. I think people need to see that sort of behaviour isn't acceptable, and I suppose it's for West Ham on how they deal with it. But I think some sort of a suspension pending an investigation, and maybe for him to acknowledge what he's done and perhaps take some time to learn a little bit about how you're supposed to treat animals is worth.
On your Twitter feed, in response to you tweeting that we were on your panel, and obviously that you were talking about this later, somebody did point out that a teacher was fired for slapping a horse. And, there needs to be some sort of kind of consistency in this. And so, you sit there and think that, obviously the teacher was very wrong to have hit that horse, and it was in itself cruelty.
At least he didn't whip the horse, hey?
But, but they were fired. No, but it wasn't in a...
No, I know, but horses get whipped, and that's perfectly acceptable, apparently, but hitting a horse isn't.
Well,
I don't think either are, actually.
Well, I could talk to you about this at some length, but I just think there needs to be a consistency in approach to this.
But what they could do, I suppose, is fine him. I think the maximum you can fine a footballer is 2 weeks' wages, so that's £200,000. He could voluntarily also make a contribution. I mean, that would be at least there's some restorative justice there if it's donated to the Cats Protection League or whatever they're called nowadays. I suppose that's one way around it.
You should have his cats removed from his care is basically what I think. It's an abuse. Yeah. And you shouldn't be allowed to keep pets.
And then he says they're cherished members of their family.
I know, it's disgusting.
I wonder which PR person advised him to do that. Jonathan, do you want to come back?
1,674 intensive factory farms in the UK. So we haven't really. I mean, of course, some of your panel said it was hypocritical, but I think all those factory owners should go to prison for 6 months. If he's going to go to prison for 6 months, I mean, to me that it seems clear cut. And this is hundreds of thousands, millions of animals. This is one cat. So that's how I see it.
OK, Jonathan, thank you very much indeed. A text here says, 5 years for kicking a cat, 5 years for burgling an old lady. What kind of country do we live in? And somebody was having a go at me here saying, read all about it. Iain Dale puts cash above morals, nation not shocked, which I think is slightly unkind. I did explain, and I'll explain a little more after 9 o'clock when we take your calls on this subject. Keep your calls coming for cross question 0345 6060 973. It's 8:15.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
17 minutes past 8. Conservative MP Tracey Crouch, political editor of the Sunday Mirror and Sunday People, Nigel Nelson are here. Claire Hanna is SDLP MP for Belfast South, and Julia Hobsbawm is the author of this wonderful book, The Nowhere Office. You get 3 plugs in this hour, by the way, Julia. Right, next text from Hassan in Birmingham. By the way, if you want to call, you can do so 0345 6060 973, or you can text your question to 84850. That's what Hassan in Birmingham has done. Does Mark Spencer being promoted to Leader of the House, is it a promotion, I would ask, despite being under investigation in the Nuzgani Islamophobia row, show that the Prime Minister doesn't care about Islamophobia? Tracey Crouch.
It's a really good question, to be honest with you, Ian. It's a very difficult question that's been posed. I think that the fact that there is an investigation going on into the Nuzgani affair, for want of a better phrase, I think is an important one. And it's been done independently of the political parties, and I think that's right. It's been looked at from a ministerial code perspective. I think that's right too. And I hope that the investigation gets to the bottom of this. I think it was right for the Prime Minister to move Mark. I wouldn't argue it was a promotion, but that's neither here nor there, given sort of kind of the actual content of the question around Islamophobia.
Because Leader of the House isn't actually a full cabinet member; he attends cabinet. That's how it works, isn't it? And
it's an important role within Parliament and the ecosystem of Parliament, but I would potentially argue that it's not as important as Chief Whip.
Claire.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the reshuffle itself is just so questionable. A fish rots from the head down. So the idea that you can rejig all the other personnel while keeping the guy in the top job with his just strong pattern of morally questionable behaviour and expect a change of culture in itself is laughable. But sadly, we know that the Prime Minister doesn't care about Islamophobia. It didn't take this new job to say that. His own very demeaning comments about Muslim women, as far as I'm aware, haven't been repudiated. This isn't the first time there have been accusations of Islamophobia within the Conservative Party, and I don't, that I'm aware of, there hasn't been any demonstrable effort to deal with that and address that. So while this is a live issue, and while I understand it's being investigated as a breach of the ministerial code, the fact of what does to the untrained eye look like a promotion sends entirely the wrong message. But it won't be news to any of the people, and we saw in very lurid detail what happens when the Prime Minister puts out slurs on people. We saw that in what happened to Keir Starmer yesterday. So a slur on Muslim women, I'm sure, has been the catalyst for many other racist behaviours over the years, and the fact that he hasn't resiled from those words has already sent a clear message, and I suppose that just emphasises it.
Okay, Julia?
Yeah, I think the short answer to the question is, at this point in time, certainly the Prime Minister doesn't care about anything else except the Prime Minister. He's in deep trouble. And I think the reshuffle is pretty unedifying. I don't know why they call it a mini reshuffle. I mean, it's a shuffle of the pack of bad cards. And one of those bad cards is that there is an unanswered problem with somebody claiming that this particular individual told her that the reason why her career couldn't progress was because of her faith. The idea that he's still in or near cabinet seems to me...
You're finding him guilty before he's been tried?
Well, I mean, plenty of people in jobs are suspended pending inquiry, Ian. I mean, you just talked about somebody not being played because they'd kicked a cat. I mean, these are not consistent values that we're describing here. The answer to the question...
But this is a case of he said, she said, and the inquiry is there to sort it out. You think he should have been suspended from his job at that point, do you?
No, but I think, to Claire's point, it sort of looks to the untrained eye, her phrase is very good, as if it is a promotion. Reshuffles are mood music, in fact designed in this case, I think, pretty clearly to detract from the considerable difficulties. And so he's certainly not being put, to use your football analogy, on the bench while this is happening, is it? He's being played.
Very good.
See what I did there? No, but I think the serious point is that the difficulty for the Prime Minister at the moment is he's not playing for anybody else but himself, and he's the Prime Minister of the country. And I don't think anyone is fooled by that. And I say that as somebody that is not, does not foam at the mouth about Boris Johnson in the way some people do, but he's clearly not doing a good job at the moment. And I think Islamophobia does exist, and I don't think it is being addressed in the reappointment, the ongoing appointment of an individual accused of it.
Nigel Nelson.
Well, I don't like to keep firing people this evening, but Mark Spencer is somebody I think should have been sacked. Nothing to do with the Nuzgani thing, because as you say, I mean, the jury is out on that one, and you have to presume he's innocent till proven otherwise. I just think he's been a completely useless chief whip, and what's been going on, especially since Christmas, and a lot of the problems that Boris Johnson has found himself in, and many of them he's got himself in himself, but that the whipping operation has been dismal, and I was quite surprised to see him simply shifted and not got rid of totally. And of course, had he then been sacked from the job, we wouldn't be having this question now, because obviously the Nuzgani affair also comes into this, but you would have parked that from a political point of view.
Well, you're all being admirably brief today, which means we can get a second question in this part of the show. Hassan, thank you very much for that. Layla in Antrim says, what more should the government be doing to make sure women in Northern Ireland have full access to abortion? Now, there was a court ruling on this today, wasn't there? I saw Brandon Lewis tweeting about it. Can you just give us the background?
Yeah, I suppose the background is it's another, casualty of the political dysfunction. The Northern Ireland Assembly didn't address this issue for I suppose, many years. And then during the last government black hole, that's before the current political crisis from, I think it was 2017 to 2019, Westminster legislated for abortion access, but the Northern Ireland Executive haven't agreed to deliver that. So there is currently a very patchy service available, which has been affected even more by the pandemic. The ruling today, I think, was I suppose women seeking abortion access in Northern Ireland have had to go to court on many occasions. I suppose there's been case after case, and whatever people's personal views on that issue, it is degrading for people to have to keep fighting these battles. I believe the ruling today was really that the executive needs to get on with commissioning these services, and that's what I believe should happen.
And the fact that the UK government has had to intervene here, and I think Brandon Lewis has been quite sort of trenchant in doing this, and that's resulted in this court case. I mean, what does that say about the executive?
Well, it's worth saying that actually and I'm a strong believer in devolution and in the concept of local power in local hands and in power sharing in Northern Ireland. But it's worth saying that in 20 plus years of up and down devolution, the Northern Ireland Assembly has never delivered a single piece of equality legislation. Equal marriage had to be delivered from Westminster. It looks like language rights have to be delivered from Westminster. Even social and economic rights have regressed under the Assembly. And as I say, that is a legacy of failure, because constitutional issues and culture and identity issues, I suppose, suck a lot of the oxygen out of political debates and have smothered other political issues, and that is something I find really regrettable. And as I say, as somebody who has campaigned on many of these issues and previously served in that assembly, I think those who think that blocking equality legislation is somehow a victory are actually creating a scenario where many people see that they can't have the life they want and the rights they need in Northern Ireland, and are starting to look at new paradigms and constitutional change to achieve those rights. So it's very self-defeating by those parties. And let's be honest, it's the DUP who block and have blocked nearly all of those pieces of legislation. It's
quite ironic that I think Sinn Féin actually support the UK government intervening in the affairs of Northern Ireland.
We see that's the thing, and it's dispiriting for anybody to have to, as I say, those of us who believe in devolution and power sharing, I suppose, to have to go around that. But I suppose people and individuals seeking the rights can't wait forever.
Julia.
Well, I can't really add anything like the in-depth analysis, except to say that I am shocked that in this day and age women have to fight for the rights for abortion. And I appreciate that it's not necessarily something that people should do lightly. And as I understand it, it's not something people ever do lightly. And the idea that women should be denied that right in any country, anywhere, especially within the United Kingdom, is appalling. So, this is the worst of politics, isn't it? When one group is penalised, and especially if that group is being discriminated against really because of their gender. So whatever measures can be done to stop this nonsense, I'm in favour of it.
Nigel Nelson, is this a failure of devolution? Is there an argument for equality issues actually still being a Westminster issue?
Well, you just took the words out of my mouth.
Oh, sorry.
Yes is the
Must have been
answer,
while you were
because
kissing me.
I was agreeing with Claire on that while being in favour of devolution, there are areas where devolution doesn't work. And so I do think we need a complete review of actually what devolved powers are. When it comes to something as important, as fundamental as abortion, that strikes me as something that should be a UK law, not down to individual countries. Same goes for equality. That should be common across the United Kingdom. And so the only way of doing this is to look again at what devolved powers are, and if necessary, trying to take some of those back from...
Quite difficult, though, isn't it? Once you've given someone a power to take it back.
It is difficult, yeah.
It's worth saying that under the devolution settlement, and we're probably losing a lot of listeners in the depth of the conversation, rights, and I suppose human rights aren't devolved. They are a UK-wide thing, but where the difficulty comes is that it's the commissioning of services is where this has stalled. But again, it goes back to lawfulness and the rule of law. There has been court ruling after court ruling over the last, I suppose, 5 to 7 years on this, and I suppose it's that lawfare over the issue that is...
But the practicality should go with the principle, shouldn't they?
But if the problem is commissioning, what I don't know who the Northern Ireland Health Minister is, what party they come
it's,
from.
It's Robin Swan of the Ulster Unionist Party.
Well, why not give that portfolio to the SDLP or to Sinn Féin?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, we really are getting into the weeds here of there's issues about cross-cutting and controversial issues have to go to the executive. But of course, as of Thursday, there is no executive.
No.
It was collapsed due to, you guessed it, a DUP election stunt. So you're starting to see a little bit of a cycle. The fact that we had 3 years of no governance because Sinn Féin pulled the same stunt and then the DUP. But there is a large and growing centre ground who each time this happens lose faith a little bit in politics, and it's important that those people do keep faith, because there's no genetic reason that we can't have better governance. But unfortunately, we have parties who do hold us back.
Tracey, quickly if you can.
I literally have nothing to add in that. I think Claire
we can go to the news.
Claire and Julia has said it all. And I think actually Nigel's pointed out there are some really good things about devolution, but there are some, bad things that perhaps need to be addressed. I think perhaps we saw a little bit of that with COVID.
0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to our panel in the final half hour of Cross Question. It's 8:30 and Lucinda Horsley has the LBC News headlines.
NHS patients in England are being told not to expect the numbers on waiting list to fall until March 2024. The government's outlined a plan for addressing the backlog, including a new online portal. Labour says it falls well short of what's needed. After making a number of staffing changes within Downing Street, Boris Johnson has turned his attention to moving his ministers around. Jacob Rees-Mogg is now in charge of Brexit opportunities, while Mark Harper takes over as leader of the Commons. Charities are calling for West Ham defender Kurt Zouma to be prosecuted. The footballer has apologised after a video emerged of him kicking and slapping a cat. LBC weather, rain moving into South Wales and central England tonight. Showers in the north but dry in the south. A low of 0.
LBC Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:34. Let me reintroduce you to my panel. Tracey Crouch is Conservative MP for Chatham and Aylesford and has a fan who's texted in to say, please can you thank Tracey Crouch? He's assisting me and has been an outstanding MP, so you do have a fan.
Thanks, Tracey's mum.
No, it's from Steve, which is her husband's name.
No.
Nigel Nelson is political editor of the Sunday Mirror and Sunday People. No fan mail for you yet, Nigel,
Okay.
but the night is still young.
Not for the first time.
Claire Hanna is SDLP MP for Belfast South and deserves a medal for her explanation of Northern Ireland politics just now. Absolutely. And Julia Hobsbawm is writer and broadcaster and author of this book, The Nowhere Office, out next week. Andrew in Kingsbury is our next caller. Hello, Andrew.
Good evening, Iain. Good evening, panel.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Excellent. Okay. My question is, will Jacob Rees-Mogg have more work on his hand, have more time on his hands, or less time, given his new ministerial position?
And he is the new Minister for Brexit Opportunities and Efficiency, I think I'm right in saying. Nigel.
Yeah, we don't know, because we don't know what the job actually entails yet, so we'll have to see. I do think it's probably a good idea to have somebody in charge of Brexit as we come out of the pandemic. I start from the position of being a staunch Remainer who accepts that Brexit has happened and what we must do now is make the best of it. So having a minister in place to do just that seems to be pretty sensible. I think his first job should be to work out how many of the things that have happened, like the empty supermarket shelves, the queues at Dover of lorries trying to get across, how much that has to do with Brexit and needs sorting out from the Brexit end, and how much it was to do with the pandemic. It's still confusing what the effects of Brexit have been.
Tracey.
I think Nigel's right on that, actually, because I think we went from Brexit straight into a pandemic, and you know, there's been bits of legislation that are being passed at the moment, or you know, in the previous months, about you know, what does this country look like post Brexit? And as somebody who lives in Kent and has to deal with the Brexit queues, you know, it is a challenge.
They don't stretch back that far to you, do they?
Yeah.
Do they?
They can do. They do. I've stood on the bridge over the M20 and pointed at queues of lorries. I have pictures on my newsletters and everything. But it will be interesting to see what the actual job description is, because if you take an issue that is a live issue, and I suspect you get quite a lot of calls in and texts in on it, but things like the small boat crossings, for example, of which, you know, we were supposed to be getting control of our borders post-Brexit and everything else. That is constantly in the news, and particularly in Kent, it is, you know, always an issue on local radio and on our local TV stations, and indeed in my inbox. But part of that could very well be because of the pandemic and not Brexit, because the pandemic meant that we were getting fewer lorries coming into the country, which was the traditional route of people coming into the country, and so they are now taking this more perilous journey across on boats, and we know that the Prime Minister is very keen on tackling this issue. We know that it forms a huge part of the Brexit sort of policy, so you know, let's see what Jacob has in his portfolio and whether or not this is part of that.
Claire Hanna, I imagine you have a few views on this.
I mean, I think it wasn't Jacob Rees-Mogg the guy who said it might be 50 years before we realise the benefits of Brexit. Once I think
I said 10.
I believe he's on the record saying it could be 50, and I suppose the point of this appointment is that his kind of whole shtick will distract people from the losses of Brexit, because as far as I can tell, the only jobs it's creating are in bureaucracy and customs officials and perhaps this ministerial portfolio. But the irony, of course, is that there are glimmers of opportunity in Northern Ireland under the protocol. Brexit was bad news. I think it's bad news for Britain, but as a little bit like Nigel says, I accept that it has happened, and our job as politicians is to try and handle things and improve people's lives. And actually, under the protocol, the Northern Ireland Protocol, the special arrangements for Northern Ireland, which nobody loves, which no party voted for, we have unique access to both the EU and the UK single markets. And that's the first unique selling point economically that Northern Ireland has had in decades. And in my book, the best peace process is a job and economic opportunity for people. And that's something we should be able to capitalise. We should be able to try and make the best of the bad situation. But because of this government's mishandling of Brexit and I suppose mixed messaging and threatening to upset and tear up the protocol every 5 minutes, that sort of investment that we should be seeing is stalled. We know that there are investors who would like to take advantage of that, being able to trade
but they won't until it's all sorted out.
Business, above all, wants stability. Yeah. They want to know that the rules will continue to be the rules. They want to know that they can do a 5-year plan, and that's what the regulations will still be. And this kind of upping and downing and sending mixed messages and threatening to trigger Article 16 doesn't give them that. So the one potential opportunity, and as I say, we didn't ask for it. Northern Ireland didn't vote for Brexit, and as I say, we didn't support the protocol. But that one opportunity that is being there it cannot be realised because of this government.
But if that protocol issue is sorted out, when Liz Truss and Brandon Lewis meet with I can never pronounce his name, Sefcovic, later on this week, if that can be sorted out, you think that there is a huge amount of money that's just waiting to be invested into Northern Ireland?
We know it. There are already businesses, particularly in advanced manufacturing and in aspects of agri-foods, that are saying that they're calling it, the kind of, one company's calling it the Almac advantage, the fact that they can uniquely trade. We know that many businesses have been told that they should set up some sort of presence within the EU in order to be able to trade more seamlessly. Northern Ireland is the obvious place to do that. So it's already happening. There are, of course, issues with the protocol. It was signed at sort of 10 minutes to midnight, and business have been grappling with it while they've been grappling with the protocol. But I mean, it's there in black and white. You can trade into both markets. And as I say, I know for a fact, I speak to investors who want to know what the lie of the land is and want to be able to realise those opportunities.
Julia?
Oh, I'm not persuaded by this appointment, and I think the word opportunities associated with Brexit at this particular moment is sort of cynical at best and comic at worst. And the choice of Jacob Rees-Mogg, of all people, to lead it at this moment. I mean, come on, it is sort of W1A meets Monty Python. It's sort of, what signal is it sending? At the very least, you can say...
You've got to have if you're going to create a post like this, you've got to have a true believer in it.
You can have a true believer, but you need someone that can negotiate well with Europe. I mean, we're in a negotiation phase. We're in a diplomacy phase at the moment. At least calling him the Minister for Realpolitik would be better than opportunities. So I think the difficulty with this, I said it before, is that what this reshuffle smacks of is self-preservation and survival for a Prime Minister in a crisis. That's not the same as moving on the government's agenda and trying to get from A to B. I'm a Remainer, but I've never, again, had such a sort of wild opposition to the Brexiteers. I'm married to a Brexiteer. I can see the perspectives. And I just think that this is not doing any favours, actually, to people who voted Brexit, this appointment, because this is cementing the divisions between those who voted Remain and those who voted for Brexit. He is not a serious candidate.
Andrew, what's your answer to your own question?
Well, I'm also a stern Remainer, and I don't believe Jacob Rees-Mogg can add any value to what they pertain is out there for Brexit. And I think he's going to have his hands full trying to drum up any business at all.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to our next question. It's a text from Jennifer in Scunthorpe. We're all being told to get back to the office, but it looks like most civil servants are still working from home. Why should we bother wasting our petrol if they won't? I've got to come to you on this one, seeing as it's kind of, it's related to your book, isn't it?
Yes, my book is all about the changing role of the office. Thank you for your question, Jennifer. I think we need to be slightly careful about demonising the civil servants en masse. There's certainly been what I would call peloton politics going on, because a senior civil servant in DCMS famously had a meeting while she was on her peloton. They've, of course, fallen on hard times.
Would never have happened in your day, would it, Tracey?
They've, of course, fallen on hard times themselves today, peloton. But the point is that I think we need to slightly separate a stick to beat civil servants with from the question about people being shamed and gaslit, actually, by employers and governments into trying to get them to go back to the office. The truth is, they don't want to, where they can have a choice, nor should they necessarily, because things have moved on massively during the pandemic. And the reality is that this speaks more to a desire to keep a status quo around city centres and property prices, and an old attachment to a notion of productivity being linked to presenteeism. I think all of these times are changing. I welcome those changes. I do think it provides a headache for people managing hybrid. I think it is creating difficulties with an asymmetry of who's in and when are they in, and so-called morgue offices. None of it's easy, but I don't think the answer is to say to people, be good little boys and girls and go back to the office. Well, that isn't going to happen anyway.
Let me possibly anger you by saying surely it's the employer's right to demand that their staff come into the office if they think that it's good for their company.
It doesn't anger me at all, but I think they need to read the room, so to speak, and get real, which is absolutely all the evidence shows now, that it's in knowledge work, in skilled knowledge work, in office work, which isn't to say by any means everybody. Lots of people have no choice at all, Iain. But for the people that do have a choice, it's a seller's market. Well, and even Goldman Sachs, that was first off the stock saying that it was a quote-unquote aberration to work from home, they're all rowing back, because the market, as we know, decides. And the market of people selling their services to businesses is telling employers, we do not want to work 5 days a week from an office.
I broadcast 140 programmes from my bedroom, and I could quite easily have said to LBC, actually, I quite like doing this. I'd like to continue doing this all the time. But they would have been quite right within their rights to say, sorry, mate, we employ you, we pay you the big bucks or little bucks, depending on your point of view, and we want you back in the studio.
And there are good reasons to have people back in the office. All I'm saying is that, and it's, not the time to go through total chapter and verse, do please buy the book, but the truth is that there are lots and lots of things that are changing at the same time around this whole question.
And it'll cost you $18.99. We're going to come to the rest of our panel in just a moment. It's 8:47.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 10 to 9 on LBC. Right, we were in the middle of a question from Jennifer in Scunthorpe about, it says we're all being told to get back to the office, but it looks like most civil servants are still working from home. Why should we bother wasting our petrol if they won't? We've heard from Julia. Tracey Crouch.
I think it depends on what kind of office or work environment you're in, to be honest with you. I had flexi working with my parliamentary team before the pandemic for a variety of reasons. And so we already had that kind of flexibility in mind. I'm very much in favour of employee wellness and well-being and looking after your team. And therefore, it hasn't impacted productivity. In fact, I think that if you look after your employees, their productivity is increased. So I'm actually really looking forward to reading Julia's book. But having been...
$18.99.
She's given me a copy. Thanks. So my well-being is already $18.99 better. Having been a minister, the one thing I will say is that you do make better decisions by having face-to-face conversations with your officials. You feed off each other better in person than you can in Zoom. And I've seen it. I've been in ministerial meetings throughout the pandemic, many of the officials still working at home. A minister sat in their office by themselves with one private secretary. And because of the hybrid aspects...
Union Jack behind them.
Yeah, Union flag, but there we are. You can't have that conversation. You can't have the bounce back because it has to be one person after another person after another person. And so...
Same on this programme, when we were doing it all via Zoom on that screen over there. It's not the same.
No, you just can't have that interaction. And I think you make better decisions when your officials are in the room because they can be talking. You say, I'm sorry, could I just interrupt? And you can have that real engagement. And I just don't feel that happens in an online environment. That's not to say that I don't think that they're working hard at home, because I do. I just think that sometimes having that group think is better in person.
Claire?
Yeah, I mean, look, work is changing. The pandemic accelerated a lot of trends that were already happening, and I suppose a lot of the technologies that facilitated, and there definitely are benefits to a more flexible approach. No doubt there's benefits to collaboration and face-to-face as well. I mean, I agree with Julia. I'm not a fan of pitting public and private sector workers against each other. I know any politician would have dealt intensively in the early period of the pandemic with civil servants who were administering a lot of the schemes on the hoof, from their back bedrooms with their kids running around, and really put a lot of work into it. I mean, the fact is there's an inherent inequality in that lots of jobs can't be done remotely, but there are societal benefits as well where we allow people flexibility. It allows us to maybe regenerate local high streets, regenerate rural areas where people maybe had to leave and wouldn't have been able to live there if they wanted to keep their work. Obviously there's less traffic at peak time, and it opens up access to jobs for people, say, with caring responsibilities and maybe with disabilities or whatever. And I know certainly during the pandemic, I saw a lot more of my kids than I do when I'm over here for half of the week. But we're going to have to get our heads around this, the pluses and the minuses, and how we, I suppose, keep town centres alive if the net amount of workers is less. And I guess for a lot of employers, public and private, it's going to be some sort of a hybrid. 2 days in, 3 days out, or whatever. But people need space to create that, and we should bank some of the opportunities of flexibility.
Nigel, can you be very brief, because we've got one more question to go, and it's quite a difficult one, so I want to allow a bit of time.
Very brief. I used to think home workers were skivers until I became one. And so now I think that its flexibility is the key. Wherever it is you are best to work, you can work. So that applies to civil servants, it applies to people in business. I have to come into the House of Commons because I need to speak to MPs face-to-face. If I've got a day's writing, I can sit at home.
Right, let's move on to Maya in Tottenham. Hello, Maya.
Hello. I just wanted to ask, which is the greater threat, Russia or China?
Right, and we've got about 1 minute each for you to answer this very easy question. Claire?
Well, I suppose it's not necessarily an either or. The world is a topsy-turvy place out there, and we realise how disparate, and I suppose there aren't the same global strengths and large global players in all of them, whether the US, the EU, the UK are all kind of upside down in their own ways. I think both are threats. I suppose China, it is more economic, and Russia at the moment, were potentially, I think it might have abated, but on the brink of the first land war in Europe in generations. But we know the negative influence that has been had on politics around the world, and that's something that we will have to grapple with. But I think both provide threats in different ways, and it just shows how much we have to get hold of a rules-based and a truth-based politics ourselves to be able to withstand some of those threats.
Julia?
Yeah, other than saying, again, I agree with Claire. I wonder whether we shouldn't reframe it so much as who do we have greater dependence on, China or Russia? Because part of the problem is the war of words around who's a baddie disguises the fact that there's big economic dependencies going on, and we need the gas on the one hand and we need the money on the other, and so I'm afraid it isn't an either-or question or answer for me. It's a deeper dive into what is the relationship we have with China, what is the relationship we have with Russia.
Nigel?
I fear China more than Russia. And I think the real problem is that I don't feel that we in the West actually understand the Chinese mind. And what needs to happen is we need to put an awful lot more work in doing that, much more conversation, much more trade, all the things that bring nations together. And once we've done that, we might actually not feel quite so frightened of China as we do at the moment.
Tracey?
Well, look, I'm not destined to be Foreign Secretary ever.
You never know.
I can guarantee it.
Very diplomatic.
I'm not diplomatic at all. But I think that the dependency issue is the important issue, and I think that Claire's right. It's not an either or. I think that we can be equally fearful of both, but I think that we do rely on both for, say, energy and for goods, and I think that we need to make sure that we have a working partnership certainly with China to make sure that we continue that relationship. But at the moment, we're potentially, in a very different situation with Russia and Ukraine, and that's a really scary place to be in.
Right, final fun text for the end of the programme. We know how everyone always looks forward to these. This is from Lucy in York. The Oscar nominations have been released today. What's the best film you've seen this year, old or new? Any of you film buffs?
Oh, yes, I can answer that one. It happens to be book-related. My son took me to the BFI before Christmas to see the Billy Wilder film, The Apartment, with Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine, and it's set in an office of the 1950s, and it is the most completely...
Is this a new film?
No, 1960. It's completely wonderful nostalgia. So, yeah, easy one for me.
OK, Nigel?
One of the nominated ones, it was Being the Ricardos. I never knew Lucille Ball was quite what she turned out to be in the movie.
I remember watching her when I was a child on Saturday
Exactly.
morning television.
I don't know how people get the time to watch films. I barely have time to watch any TV. We've just managed to finish watching the third series of Afterlife, and that was, having to schedule it in. The other
None of a cry.
Well, the other half got COVID before Christmas and spent 5 days watching Netflix, and actually really enjoyed himself. And maybe this is the tactic I need.
So you haven't watched any films this year at all?
None. I'm trying to think. I haven't even watched a kids' film. Sad, isn't it?
It's a big Saturday night for me if I manage to stay awake through a whole film. I live in a household where Encanto is on about 3 times a day on a Saturday.
Well, what?
Encanto, it's a Disney one, yeah, and
Okay.
it's a new one. It's on Disney Plus. You'd enjoy it. I suppose I have to give a plug for Belfast, the Kenneth Branagh film.
I'm looking forward to that.
There's mixed views on it, but one thing, it's beautifully shot and it is uplifting in its way.
And is it something that both sides of the divide can enjoy?
I think need to have a second watch at it. I saw it at the premiere, which was a few months ago, and I kind of, I think I just.
Oh, you're on the red carpet. I'll get you.
I don't know. No, far from it. I think it was like a Thursday afternoon.
I've only been on the red carpet once, and it was a film about West Ham football hooligans.
Kicking cats and all.
My best film of the year so far. I happened to catch the second half of Independence Day on Channel 4 on Saturday, which is one of my favourite films of all time. Yeah, I just love that film. Well, we finished on time tonight, which is a first for this programme. Thank you very much indeed to Nigel Nelson, Julie Hobsbawm, this is her book, and Claire, Hanna and Tracey Crouch. In a moment, I want to get your views on whether Kurt Zouma should be playing for West Ham tonight. LBC doesn't do football phone-ins, but this is about the nearest we're going to get. It's 9 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.